Hello, I'm Justin Chenette at the State House with a very special guest. We have Maine's Attorney General, Frey. Thank you, Aaron, for taking some time to talk with me today.
Great to see you, Senator.
So let's talk about a range of topics. First of all, you have a relatively new role. You went from the legislature and serving together as a state rep to now serving in the role of Attorney General. Big responsibility, big shoes to fill. For somebody who may not be familiar with the duties and responsibilities of Attorney General, what does the AG's office do?
Yeah, this is really just a fantastic privilege that every single day I wake up and am appreciative that the legislature who elects the AG has given me this opportunity. And the primary role for the AG is to act as the state's attorney. So this office is charged with representing the state in civil actions, in one of the primary offices to do criminal prosecutions, to advocate for the state through the law, through the judiciary on the national level. It's the role of the AG to make sure that when the state's interests, state citizens' interests, to the extent that there's an opportunity through the legal process for the state of Maine to have its say, to be heard, that's where the AG's office comes in. We're also one of the primary places to which, if there's a legal concern, so if a consumer is not being treated fairly by a business, if the state is being sued, if an agency is being sued, those issues do collect here in the AG's office, and we're responsible for making sure that that the state is taken care of legally.
Now, one of the issues that you and I worked on this past legislative session, automated robocalls. Everyone, I'm sure you get them, I get them all the time. And one of the pieces that we tried to work on is making sure that your office had the tools necessary to work with the federal government, trying to come up with a solution to go after bad actors. Can you talk a little bit about, now that it's become law and we are trying to work on combating these robocalls, what your office has been doing and is doing to try to prevent basically consumer harassment, because people are afraid to answer their phones?
And that's what it is. Back when we were, you had put in this bill, and I appreciated the opportunity to be able to weigh in from the AG's office perspective about how challenging this has been for consumers, right? So a person may get 7, 8, 10, 20 calls a day from some anonymous entity someplace. Spoofing is a word that is used to describe how these entities will hide their number so that you think you're getting a call from a neighbor, but really you're getting a call from China or a call from India, or certainly not your neighbor, and they have the thing that you need, and it really is harassing. So we were able, with the legislation that you put in, with some activity on the federal level, the AG's office is responsible for collecting up all of these different complaints that people make about how they've received these calls. What we do is we take it, we take the information that the consumer has about the call that they made, about the number that it came from, to the extent that they have any information that came from the call, we take that too, and we upload it into a federal system that allows for the state to make sure that a law enforcement agency will be able to pursue some of these bad actors. So, the challenge for Maine, and this is what you and I had to deal with, is that Maine on its own has a hard time getting at some of these different individuals. If you are in the state of Oklahoma and you are making a call to Maine and harassing a consumer, the state of Maine is going to have a hard time going after the entity in Oklahoma, because the state of Maine doesn't have jurisdiction, right? We got to go into federal court and hope that we can find that person. But when we get the federal government involved, and when the federal government is able to take all of the information it's getting from states like Maine, from states like Oklahoma, to bring a federal enforcement action, that's where really we can have some significant effect. Let me also add that because of bills like yours that bring attention to the public about, hey, look, you need to be reporting these calls to the Attorney General's office, and hey, look, we as a state are paying attention. Thanks to bills like yours, industry has also taken notice. in that we now see different apps that you can download onto your cell phone. AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, they recognize that they are part of the problem in that they have allowed this activity to persist without providing consumers with some way to opt out or to get relief. And so, again, thanks to bills like yours, thanks to actions like the state of Maine to pass your bill, it also provides that publicity that consumers know where to make their complaint, and businesses are taking notice, industry's taking notice to help protect consumers.
Now, if a consumer has, again, that flood of response on their phone and they want to report that to the AG's office, what can they do? How do they do that?
Well, so there's at least two good ways to make sure that that you can get this information in. First, call our number, right? 626-8800. That gets you to the main line. Ask for the Consumer Protection Division, and you'll be connected with somebody who can take that information down, and then we'll take it from there. We'll figure out if there's something that we can do, thanks to, again, that law that you shepherded. See if something that we can do, or at least make sure it's uploaded into the federal database, the Federal Trade Commission database, so that it can be tracked and aggregated with all the other reports. So you can call us. You can also email us. So we do have a general mailbox, both the general email for the AG's office and for the Consumer Protection Division. And to make your report there, just make sure you include any details about the call that you can, so that we can better track what the problem is and make decisions about how we can deal with it. So those are the two best ways to get it right to the office. Something that's also very valuable, and I'm assuming that you experience this, is the AG's office gets a lot of really good information about what's going on from legislators. So, senators like yourself, representatives, you hear from constituents about these different issues. And the extent to which some of this information does come in through legislators, this is just one of the services that the AG's office is able to provide to legislators, helping legislators have their constituents get the relief that they need to report it up the chain. So that's another way that information comes in. And just a quick anecdote, I was at an event in Portland back at the end of August, and I bumped into somebody who started to tell me about how they were getting all these calls, and it turned out that we had a great conversation, and I took from that person, just from this contact, information about how they had been targeted, brought it back to the office, and uploaded it into the system. So there's no one way,
Right.
But just going back to the best way is give us a call here at the office, send us an email, and just give us that information, and we'll take it from there.
So very easy to contact your office. A lot of different modalities. So keep track of those numbers,
Yes.
keep track of the robocalls, and contact the AG's office. That's an
Yes.
important factor. Now, you've been really busy, Aaron. You've been really busy taking on the Trump administration, making sure that Maine is protected, Maine consumers are protected on a number of different fronts, one being the environment, which is so critically important. Can you talk a little bit about how you view your role as AG, especially in dealing with the federal administration?
Absolutely, and it has been busy because, in particular, this administration is doing a lot to roll back some very important protections that not only has Maine come to depend upon, that Maine has accepted as best practice, but frankly, rolling back regulations that put Mainers at risk, right, in terms of the air that we breathe, in terms of the water that we drink. And so from the very beginning, there have been different issues, both in terms of litigation that Maine has joined and rulemaking on the federal level that Maine has weighed in on. Maine joins with other states, and we've expressed concern about rollbacks on how asbestos is being classified. We've weighed in on how mercury is being treated by the federal government. And most recently, the Trump administration indicated that it is withdrawing an emissions waiver that had been provided to California. It's Section 177 is what it's referred to, but basically it has allowed California to say, hey, look, cars have to have a certain emissions level. It's higher than what the federal government has provided. Maine is one of a handful of states, about a total of 13 states. Maine is one of the states that, as a policy, has said, we agree with what California is doing, and we have set our standard there. And so, as the AG, it's important for me to make sure that what Maine has said is the way in which we want to go. It's important for me to be joining with states like California, like Massachusetts, like Connecticut, and these are other New England states that I'm talking about here too, to say, this is important to our environment, it's important to our citizens. Sure, the federal government has set a floor on admissions, but states should have the ability to go beyond that because, we know what's best for our citizens, and again, particularly with respect to admissions, the state has weighed in on this. The state has said that this is the way we want to go. And so these are just different areas where, yes, because the administration is trying to roll back these regulations. And by the way, let me also add that the administration is not even doing a good job with how they're rolling them back. So that, and what I mean by that is they're not asking for public comment. They're not giving opportunity for states to weigh in and say,
engagement.
That's right. That's right. And so, to the extent that Maine is involved in this litigation, to the extent that, Maine is, from the AG's office, we're working with other state attorneys general to be involved in the rulemaking process. We're also pointing out that it's not just that it's a problem from a legal policy perspective, but it's also a problem that you're not even giving us a chance to talk about how this is working. On the emissions, for example, we're not hearing anything from the industry that this is something that they want, right? At least from, the rollbacks that the Trump administration is trying to do with, changing the emissions from coal plants. At least the coal plants are weighing in and saying we need this in order to operate, right? Not that I agree with that either, but at least we're hearing from industry that this is a concern. We're not hearing anything from the automotive industry that, they want to race to the bottom on emissions, right?
And a lot of them are moving towards electric vehicles anyway, so it's sort of counterproductive.
That is absolutely right, Senator, because the industry recognizes that this is where the market is going. This is how to be a responsible industry, and they can sell all the gas guzzlers they want, or they can put them all out on the lot, but gas guzzlers are not going to get sold, and the industry recognizes that. And the last thing that they want is to create problems, especially since they're doing this anyway.
Right. Now, one other topic area that I'm really appreciative that you've really taken the lead on is taking Big Pharma to task, in particular for their role, which a lot of people I think feel, their role in the opioid crisis. And so, not to mention like other lawsuits, but you're also taking them to task and making sure that we get, there's equity for Maine people when it comes to that and trying to tackle this issue. So how do you view, that's a big undertaking, let's just be honest, taking on big multinational corporations. Sure. It's obviously a very important task. How do you think Maine's role fits into that bigger conversation, maybe partnering with other states?
Right. So this is a national issue, right, in which we have these national drug company bad actors, distributor bad actors, pharmacy bad actors that have been price fixing, that have been, putting out drugs saying that, hey, they're not addictive, but in fact they're some of the most addictive, chemicals that we've seen. So yes, when it comes to these drug companies, Maine has been involved in a few high-profile type cases. One, we're suing a manufacturer of Suboxone who, misrepresenting, what it is that they were putting out there, and it was our responsibility to, as a state, to join with others, but also to be a leader in litigation, to hold that manufacturer accountable. With respect to price fixing, Teva is the name of one company, but there's other companies involved with this. You may have seen some national press about how Maine has joined with other states to say, hey, look, the price fixing that you're doing by these drug companies working together to keep the prices high. Maine joined litigation to say that's wrong and we need to hold you accountable. Probably the most significant litigation that Maine is engaged in right now involves our holding or seeking to hold Purdue Pharma and the family that owns Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, hold them responsible for what it is that they did to states like Maine in driving what has become one of the most significant challenges that Maine, our communities, families are dealing with right now, and that's the opiate crisis. Right? As you know, Senator, Maine has been hard hit by the significant addiction to opiates that, in large part, has been driven by reprehensible practices by entities like Purdue, by pumping out these drugs and then misrepresenting their effect. And in 2017, we had 418 people die from drug overdoses. Last year, 2018, we had 354 people die from overdoses. Those are the deaths. Those don't take into account all the people that had to be resuscitated with Narcan, or that, thankfully because of an intervention that came, they were able to get the help that they need. This is a very serious crisis, and Maine needs to work to hold accountable Purdue Pharma, the Sacklers, and other manufacturers and distributors of these different opioid medications, again, largely because it was completely misrepresented as to what it is that these drugs did, and the marketing was just relentless. Going to doctors, going to patients and saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, these are not addictive, and by the way, you need to take more because that will keep you well. Don't worry about addiction." So, Maine, on its own, as you know, back in a few months back now, we did sue specifically Purdue Pharma and members of the Sackler family. We are working, Maine is working with a number of attorneys general across the United States, Democrat, Republican. This is not a political issue. Absolutely. This is about holding these bad actors responsible, and accountable. And so we've joined with other states, both through litigation and through pre-litigation. So, just because Maine hasn't joined suits for some of these different distributors and manufacturers, that doesn't mean that Maine isn't working collaboratively with other states in pre-litigation to hold other actors accountable. Because Purdue's not the only one, right? We may have heard in the news recently about how Johnson & Johnson was held accountable. To the extent that there are states looking at sort of, how we get involved with other bad actors. Maine's right there at the table with a number of other states to make sure that drug companies, big pharma, those individuals who have driven the opioid crisis, we're not going to let you get away with it.
And you think Maine can play an important role in trying to hold them accountable?
I do.
And we can move that needle.
I do, yeah. and I think that it's important, particularly through litigation, that Maine is involved. I am enthusiastic that we now have a chief executive who has prioritized this issue in getting to the heart of what's driving the opiate epidemic. So, as you know, Governor Mills had brought on Gordon Smith as a policy person to be driving how the state responds to the opiate crisis. She herself, when she served as AG, had worked to make sure that Narcan was distributed, a practice that I continue in this office. We continue to provide Narcan to law enforcement agencies. And she gets that this is a disease, right? Not a moral failing, it is a disease. So we are fortunate that, not only from a state perspective, through litigation we can be involved, but also that we have a supportive executive branch that is making sure that at all of the different public policy opportunities, we're working together to make sure that folks get the interventions that they need, the treatment that they need, and then ultimately holding responsible those individuals and entities that got us to this point in the first place.
So Aaron, you've been a legislator before, so you understand the legislative process. Obviously now this is a different kind of role, but I'm sure those legislative experiences have come in handy in the role of Attorney General. Now that a lot of the bills have become law that we passed this past legislative session, one of your responsibilities or the role of the Attorney General is to defend the laws in case the state of Maine is sued. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe your legislative experience is now coming into play in the Attorney General's office, and maybe your philosophy of why it's really important to defend the laws that the legislature passes?
So, Sandra, as we opened up this interview with, this is my first opportunity to serve as AG, and it's the first time now that we have bills that are becoming law, right? September 19th being the date that non-emergency laws came into effect. We are starting to see litigation around some of these bills and whether or not they are constitutional, whether or not they're permitted. And, from a legislative perspective, when I was a legislator, when we were serving together in the House, when we were serving together in the legislature, I was never concerned about the constitutionality, right? Because as a legislator, what's important to me is that this is an issue that is important to a constituent or a constituency, or that I think is the right, public policy, and so that's why I'm voting for it. I'll let the AG's office deal with with anything else. So, with that in mind, I think it is imperative. Frankly, I think it is the responsibility of the Attorney General, when you have a bill, a piece of legislation that went through the legislative process, went through the Senate, went through the House, passed, was either signed or allowed to become law by the governor. In the case of a veto, if it was vetoed but the legislature overrode that veto, this is something that the legislature, that the first branch of government underneath Maine's Constitution has said is important, has said is something that we're going to spend all this time, all this energy in passing. So it's my job as Attorney General to do everything I can to represent the state's interest in keeping that bill alive, in keeping that legislation alive, because it's not my job to decide whether or not it was right or wrong. This is the former legislator talking. This is recognizing that we have a process that's laid out in the Constitution that has been followed here, and so to the extent that as an attorney I can ethically defend a bill, that the office can ethically defend a bill, we're going to do it. And at the same time, we're going to be forthright about it. The AG's office is, and I think this from some of the work that we did together in this last session. We're involved to the extent that in the legislative process, and if there's a question from a legislator about the legality of a bill, if there's a question from the executive branch about the legality of the bill, if you may remember that we had a bill that you and I that you had brought to my attention. We worked on about how to make it even a little bit stronger, about how to basically put the best foot forward. Right. We do a lot of this work to make sure that what passes is something that we can defend. And so my philosophy is that if a piece of legislation has become law, if it went through that constitutional process, it's my job to do everything I can, ethically and within law, to defend that law. And so that's what to the extent that we do have challenges to certain statutes that have been passed, I see it as the office's job to defend those laws in court.
Now, how do you view consumers interacting with your office? So we mentioned on the robocall front how they would do that, but are there other instances where the public needs to be interacting or can interact with your office on other issues or other topics?
Absolutely. Probably the area of the highest traffic in the office is individuals who are calling in because of concerns about how they were treated as consumers, either because of some misrepresentation that they experienced, or because of a product that they purchased that isn't living up to what it is that was expected. The legislature, the legislature passed very strong consumer protection laws, implied warranties as to look, when you get something, it should work the way that a washing machine works, a car drives, a TV is supposed to work. And so when individuals have issues, the AG's office is a place that they call, and there are different tools that we can provide that allow a consumer to figure out sort of what their steps are. So We can provide some education about what their rights are. We have a number of different consumer protection materials. We don't provide the legal advice. We can't do that, but we can say, hey, look, this is a whole statutory section that was passed by the legislature that provides rights for consumers, and here's material that we prepared that outlines what it is that you can do. Another very important function or service that the AG's office provides is when you do have a consumer that is experiencing a problem because of a washing machine they bought or a car they bought or some service that they received but didn't meet the expectations that they had. We have a consumer mediation service. It's free to the consumer, free to the business that's involved. We have volunteer mediators that are trained to mediate the issue between the consumer and the business. And so the for example is, if you have a consumer, they went and bought a washing machine, and within 6 months, that washing machine went. And they called up the business, but the business wasn't really, able to pay attention, or just wasn't paying attention, or the consumer wasn't able to get the right manager on the phone or the right department on the phone. When the AG's office becomes involved, everybody starts to pay attention, and usually businesses want to resolve this, right? Consumers certainly want to resolve this, right? Because the consumer just wants a washing machine. The business just wants to, not have to worry about, a bad consumer experience, or, and so the consumer mediation service that, again, free of charge to consumers, free to the businesses, it allows for folks to, the consumer and the business to come together to resolve. And that's sort of a lesson for life, right? Is that usually communication gets you 95% of the way there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that service provides communication. Certainly parties might walk away, and the consumer has other options that they can pursue legally if they want to. They can go get an attorney and pursue what they think they should through court. But, when people call into the AG's office with these kind of problems, we do what we can to point them in the right direction, help get that communication going. And just to reiterate, that is an area where we do see a lot of activity. The Consumer Protection Division is probably the most significant way that we interact, that this office interacts with the public, and we invite it. So folks should call in with these consumer problems. Members of the legislature should, call over with any constituent issues that touch upon, consumer protection issues. We're happy to be a service in that way.
So wrapping up our time together, what do you want people to remember? And obviously you're going to be here a while, Aaron, so we're not worried about that. But I'm always curious what people want people to remember your service like, whether it's the legislature or the public or even staff here at the office, that, wow, Aaron Frey, he was able to do this, or he was able to achieve this. What do you want people to remember your service like?
The Attorney General's office can play a really important role in helping solve problems, right? The law can be an important tool in helping solve problems. And the extent to which I can work with members of the legislature, I can work with agencies in the executive branch, as the attorney for the state, I hope that what people look back on or look at when they see me operating, I hope what they see is that I want to work with them in my role as AG to help them solve those problems, whether it be making sure that the legislation that they're pursuing is as defensible as possible, whether it be through representation of an agency in trying to solve problems that are important to the industries or citizens that they're serving, whether it be for the governor's office to help provide advice that helps them solve an issue that, again, is going to, if it's solved, is going to help make lives better for citizens of Maine. It's my hope that when people look back on what it is that I've been able to contribute, it's that I did work to help them get from point A to point B, so that folks in Maine could be the benefit of that work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for taking the time to talk with me, and thank you for your service to the state of Maine.
Thanks very much.